first person to ask me for money after I nearly died wasn't a stranger, a debt collector, or an insurance company. It was my mother. At the time, I was lying in a hospital bed with 6 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and enough pain medication in my system that entire conversations disappeared from my memory within minutes. My husband, Ryan, sat beside me holding our 3-week-old daughter while doctors explained how lucky I had been to survive the collision. A pickup truck had crossed the center line during a rainstorm and struck my SUV almost head-on. The paramedics later told me another few inches, and they probably wouldn't have been able to get me out alive. My biggest concern wasn't myself. It was our daughter, Lily. Thankfully, she hadn't been in the car. Ryan had insisted on taking her to her pediatric appointment that morning because he wanted me to have a couple of quiet hours to myself after weeks of sleepless nights. For the first time in my life, his stubbornness probably saved more than one life. The surgery lasted almost 4 hours. When I finally woke up, Ryan was still sitting beside me. His eyes were red from exhaustion, but the moment he saw mine open, he smiled in a way I'll never forget. "You scared me," he whispered. I wanted to answer. Instead, I managed something that sounded closer to a cough. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of nurses, doctors, pain medication, and machines constantly reminding me that healing isn't nearly as peaceful as people imagine. My family visited several times. My father looked shaken every single time he entered the room. My younger sister, Chloe, cried almost immediately before leaving after only 15 minutes because hospitals made her uncomfortable. My mother spent surprisingly little time asking how I felt. She seemed far more interested in practical matters: insurance, medical bills, whether Ryan planned to take unpaid leave from work, whether I thought I'd be back at my accounting firm before the end of the month. At first, I assumed she was simply dealing with stress differently. Everyone processes fear in their own way. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. 3 days after surgery, while Ryan had taken Lily home for a few hours, so both of them could finally sleep somewhere that wasn't an uncomfortable hospital chair, my phone buzzed. "Mum," I answered without thinking. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't ask whether the pain medication was helping. Instead, after less than 30 seconds of small talk, she cleared her throat. "I need to ask you something." I waited. "Your father has another appointment with his cardiologist next week." "Okay, the insurance still isn't covering everything." I closed my eyes. This wasn't a new conversation. For nearly 8 years, there always seemed to be another medical bill, another specialist, another prescription, another emergency. Whenever my parents struggled financially, I quietly transferred money without asking questions. Not because they demanded it, because they were my parents. "It's about $3,500 this time," she continued softly. "I was wondering if maybe you could help." I looked down at the IV line running into my arm. I had tubes attached to my body. My chest hurt every time I breathed. I still couldn't sit upright without assistance. And somehow, I was already discussing someone else's expenses. "Mom, what?" "I'm still in the hospital." "I know, sweetheart. I don't even know what my own medical bills are going to look like." There was a brief pause before she answered. "That's exactly why I thought I'd ask now." I frowned. "What does that mean? Once all your insurance paperwork starts, things will become complicated." The sentence felt strangely rehearsed, as though she'd been practicing it before calling. "I'll think about it. Your father really needs this appointment." I said I'll think about it. She thanked me warmly before ending the call. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. For some reason, it stayed with me much longer. Ryan returned later that evening, carrying coffee, fresh clothes, and a tiny stuffed elephant someone had given Lily. He immediately noticed something was bothering me. "What happened?" My mum called. "Everything okay?" "She needs money." He stared at me. "You've been awake for maybe 6 hours?" "I know. And she's already asking." I nodded. Ryan didn't criticize her. That wasn't his style. Instead, he quietly sat beside me and changed the subject. Looking back now, I think he already understood something I was still trying to ignore. After I was discharged, recovery became my full-time job. Simple things suddenly required planning. Getting out of bed, walking across the living room, holding Lily for more than a few minutes. Even laughing hurt. Ryan worked remotely whenever possible, while somehow taking care of both me and our newborn daughter with a level of patience I still don't think I properly appreciated at the time. My parents visited every weekend. My father mostly helped around the house. He changed light bulbs, carried groceries, fixed a loose fence gate, and found little projects to keep himself busy. My mother usually brought food. She also brought conversations that somehow circled back to money. Dad's prescriptions, Chloe's graduate school loans, unexpected property taxes, home repairs. Something always needed attention. At first, the requests were subtle, almost casual. Then, they became increasingly specific. One afternoon, while Ryan was upstairs putting Lily down for a nap, Mum mentioned that Chloe had found an incredible opportunity to open a small marketing agency with one of her friends. They just need a little help getting started. I looked at her. How much is a little? About 40,000. I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. That's not a little. It's an investment. It's Chloe's business. Family supports family. I had heard those 3 words so many times over the years that they barely sounded like language anymore. Family supports family. Whenever someone needed money, family supports family. Whenever another bill appeared, family supports family. The phrase had become less like advice and more like an invoice. I can't do that. You haven't even heard the whole idea. I don't need to. My mother sighed dramatically. You've changed since marrying Ryan. There it was. The familiar attempt to make my husband responsible for boundaries I had slowly started creating myself. No, I've changed because I'm responsible for another human being now. I glanced toward the baby monitor sitting on the coffee table. My first responsibility is Lily. Mum didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around our living room. The new couch. The television Ryan and I had saved nearly a year to buy. The hardwood floors we'd refinished ourselves after moving into the house. You two seem comfortable. We worked very hard for this. So did your father. I knew exactly where the conversation was heading. Guilt, comparison, obligation. Different words. Same destination. Later that night, after Mum and Dad left, I couldn't stop thinking about every transfer I'd ever made to my family. There had been so many over the years that I'd honestly lost track. Medical expenses, car repairs, mortgage payments, credit cards, business ideas, vacation deposits that somehow became emergencies. I opened my laptop, more out of curiosity than suspicion. I logged into my oldest bank account and searched my transaction history. Then I expanded the search. 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Eventually, I downloaded nearly a decade of statements. At first, I simply wanted to calculate a rough estimate. Instead, I stumbled onto something that made me stop breathing for a moment. The numbers weren't just large. They were far larger than I ever imagined. I spent nearly 3 hours going through old bank statements before I finally stopped scrolling. Not because I had reached the end, because I honestly couldn't believe what I was looking at. Every transfer I had ever made to my parents or my sister had been sitting there in plain sight all along. Hundreds of transactions that at the time felt completely reasonable because each one had been attached to a convincing explanation. Dad's heart medication, emergency home repairs, Chloe's tuition, mortgage payments, unexpected tax bills, medical equipment, insurance deductibles. One transfer by itself never looked suspicious, but together, they told an entirely different story. I exported every transaction into a spreadsheet and started organizing them by date and category, partly because my accounting background made it second nature, and partly because I needed to understand exactly where my money had gone over the years. When I finally reached the total, I stared at the screen for several long seconds. $472,000, nearly $500,000. That number didn't include birthday gifts, Christmas presents, vacations I had paid for, or the countless dinners and smaller expenses I had never bothered tracking. just direct financial transfers. For almost a decade, I had quietly become my family's emergency fund. And somehow, there was always another emergency waiting around the corner. Ryan found me sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed statements. He poured himself a cup of coffee before looking down at the papers. "You've been at this all morning." "I know." "Find anything?" I slowly turned the laptop toward him. He looked at the final total, then back at me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "I knew it was a lot. So did I. I just didn't think it was this much." "Neither did I." He pulled out the chair beside me. "Do you think your dad knows?" That question hadn't crossed my mind until then. I honestly don't know. Dad had never been the one asking. The conversations almost always came through Mom. She handled the finances. She paid the bills. She organized appointments. She kept every document. At least, that's what everyone believed. The more I thought about it, the stranger everything started to feel. Whenever Mum asked for money, she always spoke with remarkable confidence. She already knew the exact amount. She always explained why it couldn't wait. And somehow, the problem was almost always solved the same day I transferred the funds. I opened another folder, then another. Patterns slowly began appearing where I had never looked before. Several payments supposedly connected to Dad's medical treatments had been made within days of large withdrawals from casinos less than 20 miles from my parents' house. I checked again, then a third time. The dates matched, every single one. I wasn't accusing anyone of anything yet, but my accounting instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. Before I could think any further, my phone rang. "Mum." I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. She sounded unusually cheerful. "How are you feeling today?" "Better." "That's wonderful." A brief pause followed before she casually added, "I was thinking about what we discussed." I figured. Chloe's opportunity won't wait forever. I looked at the spreadsheet in front of me. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How much did Dad's heart procedure cost last spring?" Silence, only for a second, but long enough for me to notice. "I don't remember the exact number. I thought you handled all the bills." "I do." "So approximately?" "It was expensive." "I know. That's why you helped." I leaned back in my chair. "Can you send me the invoices?" Another pause. "Why?" "My insurance company wants copies of every major medical expense our family has had recently." The lie came out effortlessly. Working in finance had taught me that people often reveal more when they think documentation is required. Mum laughed nervously. "Oh, honey, I don't even know where those papers are." "You keep everything." "I'm sure I do. So it shouldn't take long." "I'll have to look." "When?" "Eventually." I thanked her and ended the call. Ryan had listened to almost the entire conversation from the other side of the kitchen. "She doesn't have them." "I don't think she does." "What are you thinking?" I looked back at the spreadsheet. "I'm thinking I need proof before I accuse anyone of anything." That afternoon, I called Dad directly instead of waiting for Mum to answer first. He sounded surprised. "Sweetheart, how are you?" "I'm getting stronger." "Good. I wanted to ask about your appointment." "What appointment?" "The cardiologist." "What cardiologist?" I frowned. Mom said your insurance wasn't covering treatment. There was a long silence. Finally, he spoke. "My last heart appointment was almost 8 months ago." I felt my stomach tighten. "What?" "They adjusted one prescription. That was it." "No surgery?" "No." "No major bills?" "I don't think so." He sounded genuinely confused. "Why?" I forced myself to change the subject before saying something I couldn't take back. After hanging up, I didn't move for nearly a minute. Ryan walked over quietly. "What did he say?" "He doesn't know what I'm talking about." Ryan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between us carried more weight than words. Over the next several days, the phone calls became more frequent. Mum asked twice about Chloe's business investment. Then she mentioned overdue property taxes. A few days later, it became an issue with plumbing. Every conversation introduced a different crisis. Every crisis somehow required money. Every request became increasingly urgent after I hesitated. When I politely explained that I was still recovering and wanted to focus on my own family for a while, the tone of her voice slowly changed. She stopped sounding concerned. She started sounding disappointed, then offended. One evening, she called while Ryan was feeding Lily. "I don't understand what's happening to you." "What do you mean? You've never been selfish before?" I almost laughed. Selfish. The woman who had received nearly $500,000 over 9 years was calling me selfish because I wasn't willing to write another check. I've spent almost a decade helping this family, and we've always appreciated it. Have you? Of course. Then why do I feel guilty every single time I say no? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the same phrase she had been using my entire adult life. Family takes care of family. I closed my eyes. I agree. So I'm done being the only member of this family expected to do it. She immediately became quiet. Then came the emotional shift I knew so well. Her voice softened. She mentioned Dad's health. She reminded me that Chloe had always struggled more than I had. She talked about everything our family had sacrificed while I was growing up. Finally, she said something that stayed with me for days. "Your sister never has these kinds of problems." I looked down at the spreadsheet still sitting beside my laptop. Thousands of dollars transferred to Chloe. Again, and again, and again. I answered as calmly as I could. "No, she doesn't, because every single time life became difficult, someone else had been paying her bills." I quietly ended the call before she finished speaking. It was the first time in my 35 years that I had hung up while my mother was still talking. The following afternoon, my Aunt Susan sent me a message. It wasn't long, just enough to make her intentions perfectly clear. "Your parents are heartbroken. They have sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay them? Family deserves better than this." I read it twice. Then I looked back at my spreadsheet. Instead of replying, I decided it was finally time to finish it. Because if my mother wanted the rest of the family involved, I was done letting her tell the story alone. I finished the spreadsheet just after midnight. When I finally leaned back in my chair, my eyes burned from staring at numbers for nearly 6 straight hours. But for the first time since leaving the hospital, I felt something stronger than confusion. I felt certainty. Every transfer had been categorized. Every bank statement matched. Every wire confirmation, cancelled check, and online payment had been placed into chronological order. There was no guessing anymore. Over 9 years, I had transferred more than $470,000 to my parents and my sister. The spreadsheet didn't exaggerate anything. If anything, it understated the truth because it only included payments I could verify through my own accounts. It didn't include vacations I had paid for, birthday gifts, holidays, furniture, appliances, or the countless weekends Ryan and I had spent repairing my parents' house instead of relaxing with our own family. Ryan looked over my shoulder as I saved the final version. So now I have facts. And what are you going to do with them? I looked at our sleeping daughter through the slightly open nursery door. I'm done arguing with emotions. If this conversation happens, it's happening with evidence. 2 days later, my mother made the decision for me. She called to announce that the entire family would be having dinner at my Aunt Susan's house that Sunday. According to her, everyone wanted to celebrate my recovery after the accident. I almost believed her. Then she added one sentence that told me exactly what the evening was really about. "I think it'll be good for everyone to talk through your recent attitude." I thanked her for the invitation and hung up. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. It isn't about my recovery." "It never was." He smiled slightly. "So, are we going?" "Oh, we're definitely going." Sunday evening arrived with cold autumn rain that matched my mood almost perfectly. Ryan stayed home with Lily because we both agreed our daughter didn't need to spend her evening listening to adults argue over money. When I walked into Aunt Susan's dining room, nearly everyone from my mother's side of the family was already there. My grandparents, several aunts and uncles, my cousins, my parents, Chloe. The room immediately became quieter. People smiled. They hugged me. They asked about the accident. For almost 20 minutes, everything felt surprisingly normal. Then dinner ended. My mother gently tapped her glass with a spoon. I'd like to say something. Of course she would. She stood slowly and smiled at everyone around the table. I think we're all grateful that Emily survived such a terrible accident. Several relatives nodded. So am I. She looked directly at me. But difficult moments also remind us how important family is. There it was, the beginning. She continued speaking about sacrifice, about parents who dedicate their entire lives to raising children, about gratitude, about how painful it had been watching someone she loved become distant and unwilling to help the people who had always been there for her. Not once did she mention money directly. She didn't have to. Everyone understood exactly what she meant. When she finally sat down, my Aunt Susan looked at me sympathetically. "Emily, maybe you should say something." I smiled politely. "I'd be happy to." I reached beside my chair and picked up a black binder. My mother's expression changed almost immediately. She hadn't expected paperwork. I actually prepared something. I opened the binder and handed identical copies of the spreadsheet to everyone sitting around the table. For several seconds, the only sound in the room came from papers being unfolded. Nobody spoke. They simply looked. Page after page listed dates, transfer amounts, bank confirmations, descriptions, medical assistance, mortgage payments, business investments, tuition, home repairs, emergency expenses, everything. Finally, my Uncle David broke the silence. "Emily, is all of this real?" I nodded. "Every single payment is supported by bank records." He looked back down at the pages. My God. Grandma slowly adjusted her glasses before continuing to read. My grandfather remained completely silent. Mum looked noticeably uncomfortable. Finally, she laughed nervously. "I don't understand why we're looking at old bank statements." "I do." I kept my voice calm. "Because everyone deserves the full story." I turned another page. According to these records, I transferred more than $470,000 to our family over the last 9 years. Nobody interrupted. So when Mum tells everyone I've suddenly become selfish because I refused another request, I gently closed the binder. "I think context matters." My mother crossed her arms. "You were fortunate enough to help. I was happy to help. So why are you acting like a victim?" "I'm not." I looked directly at her. "I'm asking a simple question." She waited. "Why did Dad tell me he never had the heart procedure you said I was paying for?" The room froze. Every head turned toward my father. He looked genuinely confused. "What procedure?" "The one Mum said insurance wouldn't cover." Dad slowly looked at Mum. "Helen?" She answered almost immediately. "It was a misunderstanding." "No." I quietly removed another folder from my bag. It wasn't. Inside were printed timelines comparing every transfer I made for supposed medical expenses with withdrawals from a nearby casino and several luxury purchases that appeared in public financial records shortly afterward. I wasn't accusing anyone of a crime. I was simply showing dates. And dates don't argue. My Aunt Susan stared at the pages. These withdrawals happened the same week. Grandpa finally spoke for the first time all evening. "Helen, is this true?" Mum's confident expression disappeared. "They're completely unrelated." "Then show us the hospital invoices." Silence. "You kept saying Dad needed treatment." More silence. "I asked for the bills." She looked around the room. "I couldn't find them." Grandpa slowly stood. He walked toward the hallway without saying another word. For nearly a minute, nobody moved. When he returned, he was carrying a thick brown envelope. "I was hoping," he said quietly, "that I would never have to open this." He placed it on the dining room table. My grandmother looked at the envelope and immediately lowered her eyes. She already knew what it contained. Grandpa carefully removed several legal documents. Before Margaret passed away, he paused, taking a slow breath. "She asked me to keep these sealed until I believed Emily truly needed them." Everyone watched in complete silence. He handed the first document to me. "It was your grandmother's final amendment to the family trust." Mum suddenly stood up. "What trust?" Grandpa ignored her. Your grandmother became worried several years before she died.
Worried about what? I asked.
That generosity was becoming expectation. The room became impossibly quiet. He continued. She noticed you were constantly giving money to the family while asking for almost nothing in return. He pointed toward my mother. She also noticed that Helen had started believing those payments would never stop. Mum shook her head. This is ridiculous. No. Grandpa's voice remained calm. Your mother changed her estate plan before she died. He looked at me. The lake house, her investment accounts, and the majority of her personal assets were placed into a protected trust. I looked down at the documents in disbelief. The beneficiaries are you. He smiled gently. And Lily, my mother, looked like the air had been pulled from the room. No. Grandpa slowly folded his hands. Margaret left Helen enough to live comfortably, but she refused to reward someone who treated love like an endless source of income. Nobody said another word. Outside, rain continued tapping softly against the dining room windows. Inside, the story my mother had spent years controlling had finally reached its end. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying my family's financial future on my shoulders. I was carrying something much lighter. The truth. Over the following months, I focused on recovering from my injuries, raising Lily with Ryan, and rebuilding my life around people who valued me for far more than my bank account. Grandpa and I became closer than ever, and together we honored Grandma's wishes by preserving the trust exactly as she had intended. My relationship with my father slowly improved once he understood how much had been hidden from him, while my mother chose to distance herself from most of the family rather than accept responsibility for the years of manipulation. Looking back now, surviving the accident wasn't the greatest turning point in my life. It simply forced me to stop ignoring a truth that had been quietly growing for years. Sometimes the strongest family isn't the one that asks the most from you. It's the one that never makes you feel like love has to be earned with another check.